might not have some moderators in here. This is Susan Bassey. I am down at the Los Gatos Police, and we were doing a little checking around on a case that is related to family court and Judge Cindy Hendrickson. And I want to point this out, and I also went and got some records today in the planning department for code enforcement. So we're going to see if anybody pops in here. It's a little 1:06, which is a little after the lunchtime. Hi, Christopher. Hi, can you hear us okay? Christopher Rayleigh, 8723. Public Press, good afternoon. I just want to make sure the sound's okay because I did not get my moderators in here. Brandon Woods, 9930, nice to see you. Okay, I came down to Los Gatos, and it was interesting because I have some backup camera help today, and the first thing they said is, oh, it's interesting to see this place when I've seen it on your live streams, and didn't realize that it was all so close together. So just a reminder, I'm at the Los Gatos Police Department, which is right here. Across the way is a nonprofit known as the Los Gatos New Museum, where I actually went to a little class on newspapers the other day. And across there is the city town hall, where the city attorney, they call it the town. We're not allowed to call it a city, we call it a town here. Where the town attorney, where code enforcement are, and then the planning department is down below. And that's where I went first this morning. So the planning department in an area is the department where you have to go get your permits. And in Los Gatos, they are very strict on that. If you want to chop down a tree in the historic district, then you need a permit. And we're looking at that because of the code enforcement issues when we started investigating Private Judge Jeff Blum. He was the code enforcement hearing officer when somebody complained about their neighbor's political signs. And we found out he was a divorce attorney, a private judge, didn't have his business license, was doing some very unethical communications as a code enforcement hearing officer, inserting himself into the legal matters that the town was paying to defend two city council members. One is Rob Moore, who is now the mayor of Los Gatos. And we're going to dive into the mayor a little bit more. And if you look at this in other cities, these are things that you can do in your town, in your city, in your county. We're just showing you how it's all connected and what records are available. So today I was actually investigating a court case where a father there were divorce papers filed, and shortly thereafter the wife had an attorney by the name of Christina Adams. And if you look back through my old work, Christina Adams is the attorney who unleashed her dog on a process server. It wasn't Mark, the process server, it was another process server. And she unleashed her dog when her children were present. She lives over in Santa Cruz County. And it was really shocking that a divorce attorney would engage in that behavior. But we've seen that consistently. Jeff Blum didn't want to talk on camera. Netta Ledgerwood slammed the door. That's in my shorts. We have 1 million views on that, because these attorneys are not behaving the way that we expect them to behave when they're on the other end of the legal system, being served with subpoenas, being served with lawsuits. And my next video, I actually have Dan Beck, who is a minors counsel up in Sonoma County. Mark, the process server, served him with a lawsuit, and he actually responded the way we expect lawyers to respond. And so we're trying to show you that attorneys are a problem in a lot of these cases that we're investigating. It's not the people that are cycling in and out of the legal system, it is the attorneys, and it's a lot of the family court judges. And here in Santa Clara County, there is a judge by the name of Cindy Hendrickson. She is a judge who was elected to the bench during the recall of another judge. Recalls of judges are very rare. And I have followed a number of disqualifications on Cindy Hendrickson, and that is when an attorney or a pro per litigant files on a judge saying that they think that they are biased. They give their facts of why they think they're biased, and the judge is supposed to either object and say that's not true, I'm not biased, and remain in the case. they can say, I can see how that would appear that way, and in the interest of justice, I'm going to recuse myself. Or they can strike it. That's something a lot of people don't realize. And Cindy Hendrickson's been doing that a lot. So have other judges here. They strike their own disqualification, and that means you have to then take that up to the Court of Appeal on a writ within 10 days. And so we see judges answering in the alternative and also striking, and it's very confusing for individuals. But when there are a lot of disqualifications against a judge, we start to pay attention, because it means that rarely do attorneys file disqualifications. But when we see that over and over again, we look at the judge's response and we look for inconsistencies. And Judge Cindy Hendrickson was closely associated with that nonprofit, Women SV. Hello from New Zealand. Hey, Steve Boyd, I didn't know you were in New Zealand. Nice to see you in here. And so what we see is that with certain judges, we see certain patterns. And one case that came across my desk over the weekend, I was really trying to kind of wall that off, was a case where a father a husband told his wife that he was being investigated at his workplace, and it was a credit union, and there had been some accounting irregularities, and he was trying to explain that away. And he progressively started, hi Johnny, nice to see you. I'm glad you're moderating, because I'm really not paying attention, and I hope people I hope you're knocking out some of those troll comments. And so what ended up happening was the father was accused, he resigned from his job, and that's similar to what we see police officers do. When I started covering Jonathan Silva, he resigned from his position, and then he sued the city in a lawsuit. And we've never really gotten the records to go over how much that's cost the city. But we did start getting records on how much these code enforcement proceedings cost when the hearing officer, Jeff Blum, wasn't even paying his business license taxes. And that made us realize that there were more attorneys out there not paying their business license taxes. And today we have an indication that one of those attorneys is a former prosecutor turned criminal defense attorney after he was prosecuted, convicted of felony burglary, but is continuing to be a lawyer and not paying his business license taxes here in Los Gatos. And so the town has a problem with the software and the third-party vendor that they're using misreporting whether or not people have business licenses. And they misreported that Netflix didn't have a business license, which got me very excited about how much money that would bring in for the city if we had found that to be true. But then we found that was a problem from the third-party software business that was running this for the town and being paid for that. And that's similar to these flock cameras. We are contracting with private businesses, giving them information. And the flock cameras, they have access to information about how we travel. Whoever says, am I international? I'm in Los Gatos, and I don't have any intention of being international right now. All I can do is get around this county for just kind of the reporting that needs to be done. And so we're really looking at especially private judges. Those are the attorneys who do the job of a public court judge for private compensation, and they make a lot of money doing that. And when they do that, they're also handling domestic violence cases. So you're paying them to decide whether or not they're going to issue a CLETS restraining order. And let me explain what that is, because for a lot of you, you have no idea. And I was contacted this weekend by a police officer who's involved in a divorce and whose wife is threatening a CLETS restraining order against him. And if that gets issued, he will not be able to work as a police officer. I am looking at what is the reason for these restraining orders, because if everybody is truly as dangerous as these restraining order issues suggest, then that's all happening through family court, not the police, not the criminal courts. And that means you have no idea who you're living next door to, who you might be hiring, if you're not paying for a business background check that would pick that up. And so we're looking for all of those kinds of things I'm getting a little spam messages. It's kind of funny. And we're looking for if police officers, if lawyers are following the law, and we're looking at the impact of the courts on employment, on families' lives. And so I want to go over what I saw in this case because I think it affects a lot more people than we realize. So this father was accused at his workplace for irregularities in accounting. He didn't really go into that, but we have the text messages back and forth between him and his wife, and he was being investigated, so he resigned from his job. He then is unemployed. It was December. He starts drinking excessively. And we see this a lot in people who do drugs and drink, and they're usually doing it to mask other pain. But it comes with behavior that sometimes is problematic. And that's what happened in this case. So his wife filed for divorce and got a restraining order against him. And when these restraining orders issue, they can kick you out of your home. They can restrain you from your children. And some employers will simply, I'm probably getting a little code enforcement parking ticket right there. And some people will find if they're in family court, what these judges do, and Cindy Hendrickson did it in this case, is they will say, oh, now your children need an attorney, so they're appointing minors counsel. Or they might say, this is very embarrassing to a business, so they will convince you to take the case into private judging, where usually nobody's watching and the judges aren't following the law and the attorneys aren't following the law in posting the cases so that we can follow them. And when they issue a restraining order, the other thing we're seeing is that they are putting parents on professional supervised visitation. Whoever said I look like a demon rat, he's gone. If you don't like how I look, don't come on my channel. It's really that simple. And again, rules on this platform, you want to make personal attacks about how people appear or what you think. That may be your opinion, but you don't get to express it here. You can go express it somewhere else because we're trying to really stay focused and teach people about what's going on. And these restraining orders that are being issued, people have no idea how often and how frequently they are issued. And if you have a restraining order issued against you, it means you don't have any right to bear arms. You lose your Second Amendment rights because here in California, they take away your, if you own any firearms, you lose those. And if you lose your Second Amendment rights, not through criminal court, but through the family court or a civil proceeding, because you can get a restraining order just from your neighbor filing one against you, or a family member where you don't have an intimate relationship, but they can get a restraining order against you. And you also lose your ability to work in about 90% of jobs. You can't work in law enforcement, you can't be a dog catcher, you can't even adopt a dog from a shelter if they run that background check and find you have a restraining order. And the other issue, you can't be a teacher. I've sat in courtrooms where I've listened to people complain that they worked for a school district as janitors, and they begged the judge, please don't issue this. It means I will lose my job and not be able to pay child support. So it's this vicious cycle. You get a restraining order against you, but you have an order to pay child support, but you're precluded from doing all of these jobs. And one police officer told me back in the old days that they used to make a statement about, they used to say if people were having a fight, they would tell, they did say husband, so it's a little gender-based, to go and sleep it off and let it calm down and then come back to their wife when they're not drunk and have them work things out. And I do wonder how many cases really just did de-escalate because of that. And now today, we have attorneys so ready and willing to file these restraining orders and judges so willing to grant them that it's really very shocking that people are losing their homes. They become homeless. They get kicked out of their home. They're restrained from going there. They can't get their personal property. If they have a job, they have to keep going to work and either rent a hotel or stay with a friend. And that starts to spiral downward. And The other thing is they immediately lose custody and access to their children. So in this one restraining order case, the husband may have done something wrong. He may have committed fraud. He may have embezzled from his employer, which was a bank or a credit union. But he then gets kicked out of his house, and 3 months later he gets put on supervised visitation. That means that you have to pay a third party to monitor you interacting with your children. And it may be at the supervised visitation provider's location. It may be in a public park or a public space, but the supervisor sits there and writes down everything you say and do with your children. And then they put it in a report, and that goes to the court. So you have the government monitoring everything you say and do with your children. And parents who are shocked to find themselves on these supervised visitation orders, it's really like being on a probation with your children, only there's no end date. And it can be indefinite. And I have people who have contacted me that have been on supervised visitation for 5, 10 years. Their children turn 18 while they're on supervised visitation. And so we're looking at, one, the economic aspect of these restraining orders. 2, they're issued in the name of public safety, but the public doesn't even know they're issued. It's really used only within the family law situation. If you get a criminal restraining order against you, which those are common, we only see those issued for 3 to 5 days. And it's like a de-escalation. We don't see a lot of permanent criminal restraining orders unless there's a conviction. So there are rights that you have in criminal court that you don't have in family court. And this father, and thank you very much for the gift, I appreciate that. So this father in particular, imagine what's going on. And I look at it from the standpoint of the kids. The kids, they're a well-known Los Gatos family. Their kids are in public schools here. The parents volunteered. The kids were in Little League and in Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts of America. And one thing that's interesting about that was I found an order one time. So remember, Judge Towery is the ride-along with the Los Gatos police judge we found in public records. And he issued an order at one point that told one woman dating a man that she was not allowed to report to Boy Scouts of America here in Los Gatos behavior that she thought was concerning about her boyfriend and young children. So the courts are restraining speech too, because as a mom who would have put her kids in Boy Scouts, I would have wanted to know what people had to say. But sometimes these courts are silencing issues and reframing them, retelling history, and that gives you a public court file as told by an attorney. And I don't think people realize what that means, but when a judge issues a restraining order against you, it's going to affect a lot of things in your life. And these supervised visitations that judges, in connection with those restraining orders, put people on are not really for public safety. They're not limited like probation, and they can go on for years and years. And so in this court file, we see that in March of 2025, the father, who was represented by Nicole Myers, who is that parenting coordinator who does not appear to be following the law for private judge parenting coordinators, she was his attorney. We didn't see her give him much of a defense. He got on supervised visitation, and 3 months later, he unlived himself by jumping off a bridge in Placer County. No headline, no information, and so think of what his children have heard. The last memories of their father are fighting with their mother, being restrained, only being allowed to see their father on supervised visitation for 10 hours a week. And this is not gender-based, because I have the same things happening to mothers. And so we're asking, how is this public safety? To take guns away from people for certain reasons. And a lot of these restraining orders are issued purely on allegations, no police reports, just allegations issued by one person with an attorney who tells a story. And I'll post this later, but one of the things that the attorney said was that when the mother and the children returned, they found there was BLOOD all over the bedspread and the floor in the bedroom. And the attorney was writing this narrative. And I looked at the pictures, and it didn't look like that. It looked like red wine. So a good attorney can tell a story like a prosecutor does in criminal court, only they do it in family court. This family had a house with $1 million in equity in it. They both had good jobs until the husband was terminated from his job. The mother worked in financial planning. And so it was interesting when middle class families like that get into family court, what is happening to them is they are losing custody of their kids. The litigation is being protracted for a very long time. And the reason that I'm really focused on this is we spend a lot of money through these nonprofits. By the way, whoever said, how is Puppy today? Puppy's great. She had a little difficult weekend. She's not holding her food down as well, but she's still willing to go, and she's going to keep coming. Here she is. She was lying down on the job a few minutes ago. And so we're trying to look at, we've asked for records in this police department for all the calls for service for domestic disturbances and mental health, because sometimes somebody will call and say somebody is having a mental health problem. But it reminds me of the calls that were made during 2020 when I got public records. And I found that everybody was calling on businesses that were operating and somebody wasn't wearing a mask. And it was really very shocking to me to see neighbors reporting neighbors and businesses when we were all kind of in it together trying to figure out how to function and be resilient. And so that was interesting to me, and that's how code enforcement works. If we learned this morning, if your neighbor is using a gas blower, there is a code in the town that says you can't do that. And if code enforcement catches you doing that, you get a $100 fine for using a gas blower. And that applies to a gardener that you might hire. And I asked, well, how do you find out about that? They said, well, if a code enforcement officer sees it, then he might issue it. But for the most part, they rely on complaints. And so that is neighbors reporting neighbors. And neighbors might report things like leaf blowers. But what we find is they won't necessarily always report domestic disturbance calls when you hear something getting out of hand. And so we know calling the police can have very bad ramifications, but it also does leave a little bit of a trail for us to investigate. So just now I did a records request in the police department for the number of domestic disturbance calls made in the town over a 10-year period. And we're also looking at the business license records of attorneys, and we're looking at how much they report that they're making, because for private divorce attorneys and private judges, we have no disclosure in how much they're making and what conflicts of interest they might have. And so it is interesting that this is going to be a way that we're going to be able to report on the attorneys that are working from home in Los Gatos and how much they're making. So those are the records requests we made today. I'm going to do a little bit more of a video. I have a video coming out of Kentucky where a judge jailed a mom. And I don't think people understand how many people are getting thrown in jail because of family court cases. And they may be related to these restraining orders or violating court orders. But being held in contempt has the same weight as a criminal proceeding and can land you in jail. And so we're looking at these restraining orders and what they're doing in the name of public safety and what they're doing to make police officers secure in their funding, and attorneys that are getting paid a lot of money to do these civil restraining orders, because they become the little mini prosecutors, and the person who is defending a restraining order has to hire basically a divorce attorney who can be their criminal defense attorney. And this is a huge problem. So if you guys out there hear of people put under these restraining orders or supervised visitation, I want you to be a little more educated about what it means, because it really does impact the mental health of the individuals involved, but it also affects their children. And we pay a lot of money for all these nonprofits to come in here for mental health issues for children or for DV issues That's Women SV. And yet the problems are still here. We're just throwing our money down the drain and not doing anything to educate anybody. So we're looking at both sides of the balance sheet. We're looking at public officials who are wasting our money that is already there. And we're looking for people who are not paying their fair share. And we're starting with the attorneys and the private judges. And we're moving on to the impact of the cost and use of these restraining orders and what it's really costing our communities and everybody else. So thanks, you guys. I'm just showing my work again today. It's Tuesday. We're over 80,000 subs. We're trying to get to 100. I'll post more videos this week. It's been a little, we've been working, and when I'm working on things, it's hard to post the videos, but I am going to do a lot of video drops this week. So thanks. I always appreciate the support. I appreciate everybody coming in here. I appreciate this. Anytime anybody can give financial support, it helps us with gas. It helps us with a lot of the backup work that we need. A lot of people are working to help us be able to report on these issues because there's nobody else in the country showing you the business of the local government, that's town hall, law enforcement, that's police, and the courts. And the courts really do affect far more than we think. And I want to make sure that everybody is informed about how the courts really work. So thanks, you guys. I appreciate everybody coming in, and we'll see